Give your sister half, my father said, pushing the contract toward me like it was already settled. Half of the company I built, half of the years he ignored, half because family comes first. I didn't argue. I opened my laptop, connected it to the screen behind him, and said, before we divide anything, let's discuss the $432,000 you moved. No one in the room blinked. Then the bank statements appeared. The meeting was supposed to be simple. That's what my father said when he called me that morning. Just a small family discussion, he told me. When I arrived, the dining table was already set like it was something official. My father sat at the head. Zola sat beside him, quiet but expectant. There was a printed document in front of him. I knew this wasn't casual. He started talking about fairness, about family, about how we should support each other. His voice was calm but firm. He said Zola had recently left her job and needed stability. He reminded me that my logistics tech company was now profitable. He said it like it was a shared victory. Then he pushed the paper slightly toward me and said I should transfer 50% ownership to Zola. Not ask, not discuss. Transfer. He explained that as the older sister, it was my responsibility. He said family comes first. He said success means nothing if you don't lift your own blood. He spoke like the decision had already been made, and I was just there to sign. Zola didn't interrupt him. She looked at me with a mix of hope and discomfort. I could tell she wasn't fully confident, but she wasn't refusing either. Maybe she believed this was normal. Maybe she believed she deserved it. I sat there quietly, listening to my father talk about balance and fairness. But there was something heavy in the room. This wasn't about partnership. This wasn't about building something together. It felt like an order. He listed reasons why it made sense. She needed security. I already had enough. It would stay in the family. Anyway, his words were controlled and calculated. There was no emotion in his tone, only authority. When he finished, he leaned back and folded his arms, waiting. Waiting for me to agree. Waiting for me to act like my hard work was something to divide without question. The meeting that was supposed to be simple suddenly felt like a test. Not of my generosity, but of how much of myself I was willing to give away. For years, the difference between how my father treated me and how he treated Zola was clear, even if no one said it out loud. When I started my company, I worked from a small rented workspace with broken chairs and one second-hand desk. I handled customer calls myself. I packed shipments myself. I stayed up late learning software I couldn't afford to outsource. Every step was slow and hard, but it was mine. During that same time, Zola decided to open her boutique. The day she shared her idea, my father was excited. He paid the rent for her shop before it even opened. He covered the interior design costs. He hired a marketing team to promote her launch. He even helped her hire staff so she wouldn't feel overwhelmed. Whenever she felt stressed, he told her not to worry because he would handle it. When I asked for a small loan in my early days to upgrade our tracking system, he said I should learn to manage risk on my own. He told me struggle builds character. He gave me advice about discipline and independence. He said real entrepreneurs don't rely on family money. But when Zola's boutique began losing money, he never questioned her decisions. He never asked why her inventory wasn't selling. He blamed the economy. He blamed competition. He blamed customers for not supporting local businesses. Every loss was explained away as bad timing, never bad planning. Month after month, he kept funding her expenses. When she wanted to expand to a bigger space, he supported it. When sales dropped again, he called it a temporary setback. Meanwhile, I reinvested every dollar I earned back into my company. I skipped holidays. I delayed buying a car. I carried pressure alone because I knew no one was going to rescue me. Eventually, Zola's business closed. My father said she had courage for trying. He told her she deserved rest after working so hard. But when I finally began to see profit in my company, the conversation changed. Suddenly, my success was described as family success. Now, sitting at that meeting, being asked to give her half of what I built, something didn't feel like support. It felt like correction. Like the years of unequal investment were being balanced by taking from me instead of accepting what had already happened. It wasn't about helping Zola start again. It felt like fixing a gap by moving my foundation under her feet. And that was not fairness. Months before that meeting ever happened, I found something that didn't sit right with me. It started as a normal internal audit. My company had grown, and my accountant suggested we review all early transactions from the first year, just to clean up old records. I agreed without thinking much about it. I believed everything from those early days was simple and transparent. When I first registered the business, my father had guided me through the setup. Back then, I trusted him completely. We opened a temporary joint account to manage registration fees, supplier payments, and early operational costs. I was new and overwhelmed, so I gave him digital access to help speed things up. At that time, it felt practical. While reviewing the statements, I noticed several large withdrawals from that joint account. At first, I assumed they were normal startup expenses, maybe equipment, maybe deposits. But when I compared those withdrawals to invoices and receipts, the numbers didn't match. Some transactions had no attached documentation at all. I went through everything again slowly. Dates, amounts, references. The withdrawals were not small. They were structured in a way that looked organized, not accidental. And they happened during a time when I remember struggling to pay certain vendors. That part confused me the most. If that money had been used for the company, why was I still facing cash shortages? I didn't panic. I didn't accuse anyone. I simply requested full bank histories from the first 2 years. The more I reviewed, the clearer the pattern became. Funds were leaving the setup account in consistent amounts. The descriptions were vague. Some were labeled as internal transfers. Others had no clear purpose. I sat in my office late that night staring at the spreadsheet. I tried to explain it away. Maybe I forgot something. Maybe it was redirected temporarily and returned. But there were no incoming transactions showing repayment. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just messy bookkeeping. The numbers didn't align with the story I had always believed about how my company started. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. After I saw the numbers didn't match, I knew I couldn't rely only on my own review. I needed someone neutral. Someone who had no connection to my family. So I quietly hired an external auditor. I didn't tell my father. I didn't tell Zola. I said it was a standard financial review, because the company was expanding. No one questioned it. The auditor asked for full access to the early bank accounts, including the joint setup account I had opened with my father. I handed everything over. For 2 weeks, they went through every transaction line by line. Dates, amounts, transfer routes, digital authorizations. Nothing was rushed. When the report came back, it was clear and detailed. The withdrawals I noticed were not random. They were part of a pattern. Over 2 years, multiple transfers had been redirected from the joint account into another account. The total amount was $432,000. $432,000. The funds were marked in the system as temporary reallocations. That phrase appeared again and again. But there was no formal loan agreement attached. No repayment schedule. No internal memo explaining the purpose. Just that label. The auditor traced the receiving account. It was connected to a property purchase registered under my father's name. The timing matched the down payment and installment dates of that property. The transfers from my company's setup account aligned almost exactly with the purchase timeline. I stared at the printed report for a long time. I wasn't shocked in a dramatic way. I was steady, calm. The facts were sitting in front of me in black and white. The money that was supposed to support the foundation of my company had been redirected to help buy real estate. What made it heavier was the silence. There was no record of repayment. No incoming transfers correcting the balance. No written agreement saying this was temporary. Legally, the company had always been registered under my name. The joint account access was given for convenience during setup. It was never meant to become an open door. The auditor didn't give opinions. They only confirmed numbers. The total missing capital, $432,000. The classification, undocumented internal transfers. The status, unrecovered. I thanked them, paid the invoice, and locked the report in my drawer. I didn't confront anyone. Not yet. I needed to understand not just what happened, but when the right moment to address it would be. When I first received the auditor's report, I didn't rush home. I didn't call my father. I didn't send angry messages. I closed my office door, sat alone, and thought carefully. My company was finally stable. Contracts were increasing. New clients were signing long-term deals. Investors were watching. One emotional move could damage everything I had worked for. If I confronted him too early, it could turn into a family crisis. Arguments, accusations, drama. That kind of noise spreads fast, especially when business and family are connected. I couldn't afford instability. I had employees depending on me. I had partners who trusted my leadership. So I chose silence, not because I was weak, but because I was strategic. I told myself maybe there was an explanation. Maybe he planned to return it quietly. Maybe he believed it was temporary and would fix it later. I gave him space in my mind. Even if the numbers didn't support it, I focused on growing the company stronger so that if I ever needed to address it, I would stand from a position of power, not fear. Months passed. Revenue increased. We expanded our software system. I made sure all financial permissions were updated and secured. The joint account was closed. Digital authorizations were reviewed. I tightened every door quietly. Then came the meeting. Sitting at that table, listening to my father talk about fairness, something shifted inside me. He spoke about equality. He spoke about sharing success. He spoke as if I owed half of my company to Zola, because family comes first. But the numbers were still in my drawer. The same man speaking about balance had redirected $432,000 without my knowledge. The same voice asking me to give up ownership had already taken capital from the foundation of my company. The irony was no longer subtle. It was clear. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about consent, about respect, about accountability. If I had confronted him months ago, it might have looked emotional. But now, with him demanding half of what I built, silence would have looked like agreement. And I was not agreeing. That meeting wasn't just about ownership. It was about truth. And for the first time, the timing felt right that I did not go to that meeting unprepared. The night before, I opened my laptop and reviewed everything one more time. Bank statements, transaction histories, authorization records. I organized each file in order by date. I highlighted the transfers. I marked the receiving account. I created a simple spreadsheet that showed the amounts clearly, with no complicated language. Just numbers, dates, movement. I wasn't planning to argue. I wasn't planning to shout. I knew emotion would only make it easier to dismiss me. So I decided to let the facts speak. When my father finished explaining why I should transfer 50% ownership to Zola, the room became quiet. He leaned back like the matter was settled. That was when I calmly turned my laptop toward me and said, "Before we discuss division, I need to clarify something." I stood up, connected my laptop to the screen behind him, and the spreadsheet appeared. At first, no one understood what they were looking at. It was just rows of numbers. I explained slowly. This is the original setup account from the first 2 years of the company. I pointed to the highlighted rows. These are transfers labeled as temporary reallocations. I didn't look at him while speaking. I kept my eyes on the screen. I showed the dates. Then I showed the matching deposit dates into another account. Then I showed the property purchase timeline connected to that account. No accusations. No dramatic tone. Just sequence. Zola leaned forward. My father's posture changed. He stopped leaning back. I clicked to the next slide. Digital authorization logs appeared. These permissions were granted during initial registration, I explained. They were never documented as long-term financial control. The room felt different now. Not loud. Not chaotic. Just heavy. Then I scrolled to the bottom of the spreadsheet where the total was calculated clearly in bold numbers. $432,000. I didn't raise my voice. I simply said, "Before we divide ownership, we need to reconcile capital." Silence filled the space. No one interrupted me. No one could. For the first time since the meeting started, I was not being asked to justify my success. The focus had shifted. The conversation was no longer about generosity or family duty. It was about accounting. I closed my laptop gently and sat back down. I had not attacked anyone. I had not embarrassed anyone publicly. I had only presented documented evidence. And that changed the room completely. At first, Zola reacted the way I expected. She shook her head slightly, and said there must be some mistake. She looked at our father and then back at me, almost asking me silently to explain it differently. Maybe it's just accounting language, she said softly. Maybe it was moved for business reasons. Her voice wasn't angry. It was protective. I understood why. For years, she believed our father supported her boutique because he believed in her dream. He paid her shop rent. He covered marketing campaigns. He encouraged her to expand when sales were slow. She trusted that money came from his personal savings or investments. That's what he always said. I didn't argue with her. I simply reopened the spreadsheet and zoomed in on the dates. These transfers, I said calmly, happened during the same months your boutique expanded. I showed the timeline clearly. The week she moved into a larger storefront, a large withdrawal left the company setup account. The month she launched a new marketing campaign, another transfer appeared. When she hired additional staff, the numbers matched again. Her face changed slowly. She leaned closer to the screen. She wasn't defending anymore. She was calculating. Then I showed the property records connected to the other account. The down payment for the rental property our father later described proudly as a smart investment. The installment payments lined up almost exactly with the remaining transfers. Zola looked at him this time, not at me. "Dad?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer immediately. For the first time, I saw confusion on her face. Not because she didn't understand the numbers, but because she was connecting them to her own timeline. The support she received was not coming from extra savings. It was connected to my company's early capital. She sat back slowly, processing everything. The boutique that failed, the encouragement, the reassurance, the funding that never seemed to run out. It now had a different source. "I didn't know," she said finally. Her voice was smaller than before. I believed her. This wasn't just about money for her anymore. It was about realizing that the help she trusted might have cost someone else without her knowledge. The pride she once felt about being supported now carried a different weight. She wasn't angry at me. She wasn't even arguing anymore. She was silent, and that silence said more than any defense could. In that moment, the room shifted again. It was no longer two sides. It was three people facing the truth at the same time. After the silence stretched across the table, my father finally spoke. His voice was not loud, but it was firm. He said the money was never stolen. He called it a loan. He said he moved the funds temporarily, because the family needed flexibility at that time. According to him, everything he did was for us, not against us. He explained that when Zola's boutique needed support, he believed the family resources should work together. He said my company was new but promising, and he trusted that it would recover quickly. He described the transfers as short-term borrowing. It was always meant to be returned, he said. I listened carefully. I didn't interrupt him. I let him finish. When he was done, I opened one document again. If it was a loan, I asked calmly, where is the agreement? There was no signed contract, no email confirmation, no message discussing repayment terms, no interest rate defined, no schedule, nothing that described it as a loan in writing. He shifted in his chair and said that family doesn't need contracts. He said paperwork is for strangers. He repeated that everything was done for the family's benefit. I nodded slowly. Then why was it labeled as temporary reallocations in the system instead of family loan? I asked. He didn't answer. Directly. Legally, the company had always been registered in my name. During the early setup, I had granted him digital authorization, so he could help manage transactions while I handled operations. That access was practical, not permanent ownership. The authorization logs clearly showed when access was granted. They also showed it was never formally extended beyond the initial setup period. There was no written approval for long-term use, I said. And there was no repayment recorded. He insisted that as my father, he had the right to make financial decisions for the family when necessary. He believed his intention justified the action. But intention does not replace documentation. Trust does not replace consent. The more he defended himself, the clearer the gap became. His argument was emotional. Mine was factual. He wasn't denying the transfers. He wasn't denying the amount. He was only reframing it. In that moment, I realized something important. This wasn't about whether he thought he was wrong. It was about whether the numbers could support his explanation. And they couldn't. The room felt heavier again, but different this time. Not confusion. Not shock. Just reality settling in. The word half was still sitting in the air. It had started this meeting. It was supposed to be simple. Half of my company transferred to Zola. That was the request. I looked at my father calmly and said, if we are going to talk about division, then we have to start with reconciliation. He frowned slightly. I continued speaking clearly, without raising my voice. Before any ownership is divided, the missing capital must be addressed. I turned the laptop back toward them and showed the total again. $432,000. If this was a loan, I said, then it needs to be treated like one. That means a written agreement, a repayment schedule, documented interest based on the time the funds were used. The room was quiet again. I am not asking for punishment, I added. I am asking for accounting. I explained it in simple terms. If someone invests capital into a company, their equity reflects that investment. If capital is removed, ownership percentages shift because the foundation changes. My early growth had been slower because that money was gone. I had taken on more pressure, more risk, more responsibility. So if we are discussing giving away 50%, I said carefully, we first calculate the real financial position. I laid out two options clearly. Either the $432,000 is repaid with documented interest, restoring the original capital balance, or the company's equity is recalculated to reflect the missing funds as an external withdrawal. In that case, ownership adjustments would not favor anyone asking for half. This was not emotional. It was structural. Zola listened silently. My father looked at the spreadsheet, then at me. He realized the conversation was no longer about generosity. It was about math. For years, I said, I carried losses I didn't understand. Now I do. If we are correcting things, we correct all of it. I wasn't trying to embarrass him. I wasn't threatening legal action. I wasn't even mentioning consequences. I was simply defining the order of operations. Half is not a starting point. Half is a result after the full amount is known. The discussion had shifted completely. The focus was no longer on what I owed. It was on what was missing. I leaned back in my chair and folded my hands calmly. Once the capital is reconciled properly, I said, then we can discuss what fairness really looks like. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't anger. It was structure. And structure is harder to argue with than emotion. The meeting did not end with shouting. No one flipped the table. No one stormed out. It ended quietly, but nothing about it was small. The air in the room had changed. The conversation was no longer about what I should give. It was about what needed to be corrected. My father didn't agree immediately. He asked for time. For the first time in years, he was not giving instructions. He was considering terms. That shift alone said everything. Over the next few weeks, there were no dramatic family arguments. There were emails. There were drafts. There were meetings with a financial advisor. A formal repayment structure was written. The $432,000 was documented properly as debt. Interest was calculated based on the years it had been used. Installment dates were scheduled. Everything was signed. This time, there were contracts. Zola called me privately during that period. She told me she was withdrawing her request for ownership. She said she didn't want something built on confusion. She admitted she had never understood how much pressure I carried while building the company alone. She decided she would start again, but this time with clear boundaries and her own funding. It wasn't dramatic. It was mature. My father signed the agreement without celebration. He didn't apologize in a long speech. He didn't try to justify himself again. But something about him had changed. The authority he once carried without question was now measured. Not broken, just balanced. The company remained fully mine. The numbers were corrected slowly through structured payments. Cash flow stabilized further because everything was now transparent. Investors respected the clarity. My team never even knew the full story. The stability I protected remained intact. But the biggest change wasn't financial. From that day forward, no one in my family used the word half casually. Not in jokes. Not in suggestions. Not in expectations. Because now, everyone understood that division requires full calculation first. I didn't win by exposing anyone publicly. I didn't need to embarrass my father. I didn't need revenge. I simply refused to carry silent losses. And sometimes, the strongest shift in power doesn't come from raising your voice. It comes from knowing your numbers and standing by them.